Y'all, for the life of me, I cannot understand how I became a target for the white supremacy movement. But here we are. Let's get into it. So I did a video about Nietzsche, completely unaware that he and his writings have been misinterpreted to be a part of the Nazi Party in Germany and overall has been utilized to support white supremacy. But the writer doesn't ever promote white supremacy or a Nazi movement, and he died way before these movements happened. So let's get into some of the writings of Nietzsche, his theories, his thoughts, and then we will slowly work our way into how he got completely misinterpreted and picked up by these weird little terroristic groups. Okay? So Friedrich Nietzsche had this idea about Nietzsche's idea of an overman, and we're going to talk about that perspective and his life from his point of view, and the idea of life and the meaning and purpose from his point of view. And to anybody coming from my little white supremacy forum, don't worry, there's no beeping. Let's get into it, okay? Okay. So Nietzsche had this idea of the Overman, and it's called Ubermensch. I'm not German. I'm so sorry if I pronounced it wrong. But it is one of the most significant concepts of his thinking. Even though it's mentioned very briefly only in the prologue of Thus Spoke that the Sutra. Again, not German. It might be sensible to conceive that Nietzsche has something in his mind about how a man should be more than just all human and all see human, regardless if he was one or not. All these ideas have been pondered on and developed through all of his works. The concept then seemed to reveal much about the way Nietzsche saw life. In this essay, I'm going to try to attempt to, as much as possible, explain the idea of the Overman by Nietzsche and life from the perspective of such an Overman. So, the idea of an Overman. This is described as one who is willing to risk all for the sake of enhancement of humanity. And contrary to the last man whose sole desire is his own comfort and is incapable of anything beyond oneself in any form, this suggests that an overman is someone who can establish his own values as the world in which others live their lives, often unaware that they are not pre-given. This means an overman can affect and influence the lives of others. In other words, an overman has his own values, independent of other people's, which affects and dominates others' lives that may not have predetermined values but only herd-like instinct. An overman is then someone who has a life which is not merely to live each day with no meaning, when nothing in the past and future is more important than the present. Or more precisely, the pleasure and happiness in the present, but with a purpose for humanity. In Nietzsche's view, an overman should be able to affect history indefinitely. He will keep re-entering the world through other people, their minds, and affect thoughts and values. Napoleon, who was highly admired by Nietzsche, may be seen as an example here since he changed and created orders in Europe. What he did affects greatly in Europe today. This idea agrees with another of his most significant ideas, the idea of the will to power. He asserts that life is the will to power. Although it is hard to say exactly what he meant by that term, it can be described as something which underlies how humankind thinks, behaves, and acts in all circumstances. He views that a human being is always in a constant struggle to quench his own desire. This is shown in the context of power, used to exclude desires of others that is in no conflict to his. Power that is used to achieve what they desire. A living thing always seeks to discharge its strength, not only to survive, but to power, and this sometimes results in its violent behavior, which is, allegedly by Nietzsche, intrinsic to the nature of men. However, the way to will can be different, constructive or destructive. In this interpretation, we believe would then be that an overman uses the will to power to influence and dominate the thoughts of others creatively from generation to generation. In this way, his existence and power live on after he dies. Nietzsche also has the answer of life that seems suffering. His answer, which is expressed in the same book of Zarathustra, is an attitude towards life that helps one overcome the feeling of its meaninglessness. It starts with the idea that life is an eternal recurrence with no beginning and no end, but a repetition of the very same life over and over again. With all suffering, unhappiness, and misdeeds in life, one may feel cursed and despaired if he inevitably were to repeat the same life with the same pain and joy. However, the most important point may not be whether life is really an eternal recurrence. Rather, although not explicitly stated, the important point is that an overman should view it differently, such that in the very same life, there has been a moment that it redeems everything else. It then makes him content with and happy to repeat that very same life again and again. He's got the feeling of unity of creation and destruction, good and bad taste of life, and is able to say that life is good even if it may seem terrible and questionable. He views all of the past actions, silly or wise, accidental or achieving, as a necessity to becoming oneself. Therefore, he can redeem himself and thus be willing to repeat the same life again. Some may even say that it was and thus I willed it, even though he knows well that one cannot will backward and there are many limitations of life. It implies that living a life of an overman is to live with the knowledge of what has already happened and constant reinterpretation according to it. Clearly, an overman is then someone who can, with appreciation, face life that may seem so suffering and absurd, knowing that the basic conditions of life will not change, even when he is in the ideal state of an overman. In a sense, overman is about self-overcoming. It involves an attitude towards life when one may feel despaired and feel life is meaningless. It is about the way to deal with truth, not in a direct manner with straightforward rules and as in rationalism, but more like sensitive mix of trickier indirect approaches. As you compare this with winning a woman's heart, those who approach clumsily and directly will bound to failure and hence leave dispirited. When compared to Kantian view of truth, it can be seen that going straight into finding an absolute naked truth may leave one unsatisfied with questions that remain unanswered. Instead, Nietzsche suggested the way to tackle this by going along with it and take it as it is. One will then feel content and happy with the life that they may be so questionable. Another characteristic used to describe an overman originated in his earlier work, The Birth of Tragedy. In this book, the notion of Apollonian and Dionysian principles is used with respect of his analysis of the Greek tragedy. They're used to describe two principles men use in thinking which consequently determine actions. Apollonian principle is the principle of light, rationality, under order and clear boundaries, whereas Dionysian principles is the principle of the dark, irrationality, the collapse and order and boundaries. The Apollonian views an individual as separate from the reality and hence can be viewed dispassionately with rationality. On the other hand, the Dionysian views things as living whole where one is part of a larger reality. The Apollonian therefore involves no passion or emotion but pure reason with order, whereas the Dionysian is passionate, dynamic, and unpredictable. Nietzsche believes that a balance of the two principles is essential in order to have some meanings in life. He seems to be very fond of art and views that artistic works, paintings, plays, literature, or more exhibit a great deal of Dionysian principle in the form of creativity. In his later work, the importance of the Dionysian principle is in living a life with values and meaning is expressed clearly. He views that the highest state attainable by a man can be achieved when life is conceived in terms of realization of the Dionysian ideal of the Overman. That means one must realize and accept his own Dionysian nature and use it appropriately. From this perspective, Nietzsche must have treated art as something higher than ordinary mass, conventional logic, and rationality, such as that in science, for he admired creativity and beauty, and art above all things. A person who will be viewed by Nietzsche as an overman is then more likely to be an artist who uses his Dionysian principle and way of thinking and feeling to create works that carry particular individual picture or interpretation into the world. His values may or may not be the same as any other, but a good artist should be able to combine his creativity with his perception of the world and life and express it well in his work. In comparison to Aristotle, who views that the most desirable state of a person is a philosopher who contemplates, Nietzsche viewed traditional philosophers during his time as people who did not really affect the world outside, and usually their traditional philosophical works were merely self-confession. It can be seen that his value is highly placed on the concept of Dionysius. Therefore, he praised the Greek civilization where a lot of creativity took place, even more than in the present society. Nietzsche accepted that Socrates did affect the history greatly, which is a character of Nietzsche that Nietzsche valued. However, he also thought Socrates, for the Western society, was to blame for emphasizing the Apollonian principle too much. Socrates was thought to have gone too far in defending rationality. He even viewed that we could use reasoning in everything so that nature's flaws can be corrected. It is then what the Western dreams of and pursues up until now through science and technology. This is the view that does not accept human limitation, that men are powerless and have no control, but always places men on top of everything. In contrast, Nietzsche views that an overman must be able to accept these limitations and can face it in the eternal recurrence. Nietzsche must have felt that the Western culture had put less and less significance on artistic creativity and passion than mental and spiritual power, which create beauty in life, have fewer and fewer places in modern society. Emotion is one of the attributes of Dionysius. It is also one of the entities when Nietzsche defended. He viewed that emotion is natural. Its repression or suppression is psychologically disastrous. This also includes sexuality. He attacked Christianity for its traditional value that places bars on emotion and impulse, and this is viewed by Nietzsche as self-denying. He disagrees on inhibiting and thwarting human-owned nature. Rather, an overman must accept his own nature and divert the energy of primitive impulses into a culturally higher or socially more acceptable activity. This is exactly what should happen to a good artist on creating his work of art. To him, the Dionysian is not completely dark and evil, as opposite to the Apollonian, which is associated with light and reason. However, it is rather viewed as natural, both good and bad, just like any ordinary human being. It is in every human nature. With the right balance with Apollonian and the right use, a burst of creativity is the result. However, it is usually the case that when the Apollonian principle mixes with the Dionysian, it tends to suppress the Dionysian. As a result, the Dionysian principle is expressed in a destructive way. Basically, an overman must be able to control this and divert the Dionysian power into something creative. To Nietzsche, Dionysian is profoundly irrational rather than negatively or stubbornly irrational. In the present age, where science and rationality are highly valued, I realize that it is hard to accept the negative side of being rational, since it means to be the most reliable tool in treating others, living together, and judging. Without it, society can be chaotic and too disordered, and no control is imposed on the irrational ones who do not use the Dionysian principle in a destructive way, in a productive way. However, we can agree with Nietzsche in the beauty of the product created out of Dionysian principle and feel that the right mix of Apollonian and Dionysian will take the world much nobler, not in the luxurious sense, but aesthetic one. The world with no passion and emotion will be an unnatural one, and this special property, among others, of human that differs from other animals will be lost. Nietzsche might or might not consider himself an overman, but he's surely determined to be a means or a bridge who brings closer to reality an emergence of an overman. In his view, men are not born equal. He always stresses on the difference of men, hence in contrast to Marx, who includes everyone into his ideal society. For Nietzsche, there are only some capable and talented who qualifies to be an overman from his point of view. Therefore, he is usually perceived superficially as an elitist, which might have brought down the value of his thinking. However, it is a fact that it's hard to swallow for all of us and quite special on the ability of men. At least throughout history of mankind, up to the present, for men are educated differently and experience different things. Nevertheless, Nietzsche's thinking provides some space for this. He said that his ideal is not necessarily everyone's universal ideal. Each of us values things differently, and therefore his overman may not be the same as others' overman. He consequently urges for reevaluation of traditional values, such as the suppression of emotion, the wholehearted devotion of rationalism. An overman, in his view, should not be restricted by tradition nor bound by convention, but has independent values of his own. From all that is shown above, we may say that Nietzsche's overman must be able to affect history indefinitely, conceives life in terms of Dionysian realization, and is able to divert Dionysian principle into something creative. With this kind of attitude and the realization of his own limitation in life, he would then be able to face life, look back with satisfaction, realizing that all paths make him what he is today, and hence feel happy if he were to repeat that very same life eternally. An overman should then be content with his own life and appreciate every bit of it, even though some of them are painful and suffering. He spends each day of his life creating beauty, which affects the minds of others throughout the time, knowing that his life has values and meaning since his existence of will to power will live on indefinitely. Here I am referencing the Cambridge Companion to Nietzsche that was published by Cambridge University Press in 1990. I'm also looking at Nietzsche, Life as Literature, published by Harvard University Press in 1994. Nietzsche for Beginners, Writers and Readers in 1990. Nietzsche, A Critical Reader, and finally Philosophy 2 lecture handout. Overall, reading this, sharing this with you, if our white supremacy friends think that Nietzsche is considering them an overman, I would say that they're failing significantly because, one, they are using a herd-like mentality by taking on this idea of being a better elite race and then utilizing it in a way to attack, even if the attack is like a cyber attack at this point, which I think is so pathetic. You're not using independent thought. You're not using independent value. So you're not an overman there. He also requires an overman to have creativity. There is nothing creative about acting in a herd-like mentality to consistently and persistently comment on videos and make negative, cowardly comments towards race and agenda. It doesn't give you an overman attitude to be dismissive of other ideas and traditions and opportunities of how they express themselves. I don't think that the white supremacist movement that has attached itself to Nietzsche's idea of the overman or the Ubermensch have truly read or understood Nietzsche in any way, but have just adopted this thought process that the Nazi Party adopted in Germany. In my next video, we will talk about how his writings got so mixed up and how the Ubermensch becomes this idea and a way to consistently thwart other cultural groups and support and justify the use of ethnic cleansing. Yeah, so if you want to learn more, or if you're just here to listen to chirping sounds, either way is okay with me. Chirp away. Have a great day. Educate yourselves, because knowledge is the way to true freedom always. And please find an independent thought outside of joining terroristic groups. I think that is, I hope that this is the actions of children who don't necessarily know who they are yet. And to those people, I say that the only person to be is you. Like, you can be whomever you want to be, and racism is not a personality trait. Have a good day.